All right, so what you're going to need out today are the Chapter 32 notes that you printed out. We're going to discuss animal form and function. I sent a link for a Quizlet. It has 20 vocab words that you'll need to study, play a little game with. And then you're going to take a Socratic quiz and then email me the word complete when you're done with everything. That will get you your attendance for today. So chapter 32, part one. Part one is just basic principles of animal form and function. Part two, we're going to talk about the endocrine system. So we're going to do a little overview of anatomy in this chapter. Really what I need you to know from today is mostly, the most important thing is positive feedback and negative feedback. This is what would still be covered on the AP exam. All right, so two vocab words. Anatomy would be the structure of the organism and physiology would be the function. So an example of this would be the anatomy of the heart is it has four chambers. It has blood vessels where blood comes in. It has blood vessels where blood goes out. The physiology, the function of it would be those chambers fill up with blood and that the heart is a muscle and it contracts to push blood out and bring more blood in. So structure is going to dictate function, the heart being so, and you remember when we did the heart dissection, which by the way, I think I told sixth period this, I ordered sheep hearts. It turns out Mr. Kasner actually ordered me pig hearts. So they actually were pig hearts. I think some of y'all saw that on the container and you're like, are you sure? Are you sure these are sheep? So just so you know, they were pigs and they came from some really big pigs. But what you can remember is how difficult it was to saw through those hearts. And that's because they are so dense with muscle. And so the density of the muscle is the structure. The function would be it can contract really hard to send blood long distances through the body. So structure is going to dictate function. Here we have our classic example of our jackrabbit. Big long ears, and when I ask students why does the jackrabbit have these big long ears, they say so it can hear better, and that actually is not why. They're big, they're thin, and you can see all of these blood vessels. And so we know that the jackrabbit lives in a very hot and dry environment. And so what would be really important is that the jackrabbit's able to achieve evaporative cooling. And so that's what happens. Hot blood rises, the hot water is going to evaporate out, leaving the rabbit cooler behind. And so animal form and function are correlated at all levels of organization, from cells to tissues to organ systems to shapes. Size and shape affect the way the animal interacts with this environment. So you notice here all of these torpedo-shaped animals right here. And so we've discussed torpedo-shaped animals before, and what you can recall, the topic that we put that under was convergent evolution. We have a fish and a penguin, and they both have a torpedo shape. We also know that dolphins have a torpedo shape, but what you would think is that since they're shaped like that and they live in a similar environment, that they must be, in an evolutionary sense, closely related. But we find that they are not. They are products of what's called convergent evolution. They had a similar problem or a similar environment and they adapted to that environment. And so the best way to be able to tell if the size and shape or the way an animal interacts with its environment is due to convergent or divergent evolution is to, I'm waiting for someone to answer. What is the best way to determine evolutionary relationships? You are right. DNA, RNA, amino acid sequences. That's the best way. So that's how it is found that dolphins and sharks both have torpedo shapes, but they are not products of divergent evolution where they share a recent common ancestor. They're actually products of convergent evolution where they're distantly related, but they look really similar. So many different animal body plans have evolved and are determined by their genome, kind of like we just discussed. All right, I need to move my screen down if it'll let me to cover. All right, so now you can see these are all of the organ systems. You most likely already know most of these just because you have them, and you've probably learned them in other science classes. Digestive, circulatory, respiratory, immune, we've already talked about that. Excretory, that's one that a lot of people don't know. It's just the excretions, like from your kidneys. Endocrine, that is one that we're going to talk about in this chapter. Reproductive, that would be really cool if I could get to that this year. It's actually not part of our curriculum, but how neat would it be to just try to keep you interested in what we're doing with this distance education. Maybe I'll do a little reproductive lecture or something like that. I'm not necessarily on like reproduction itself, but on just like the hormones and menstrual cycle and stuff like that. It's all actually very interesting. We have discussed nervous system. We'll go back over that during AP test prep. Integumentary is the skin and its derivatives, skeletal and muscle. And so for our purposes, we want to make sure that you have a pretty good understanding of immune, endocrine, and nervous. And I'll review those with you when we get to test prep. There are 4 main types of tissues that make up all of the organ systems, or that make up all the organ systems. I'm sorry, I thought I heard a child getting up. They may actually come down here. We have 4 different types of tissues that make up our organ systems. Epithelial is going to cover the outside of the body, and it's going to line the organs and the cavities within the body. Connective is going to bind and support other tissues. It's obvious that cartilage, tendons, ligaments, it's obvious that those 3 belong and are connective, but a lot of students are surprised to hear that bone, blood, and adipose, which is fat, actually belongs under connective tissue. So remember that blood is actually connective tissue. It's there to support other organs. Then we have muscle that controls body movement, and then nervous system that senses stimuli and transmits signals throughout the animal. And so we don't actually need you to memorize this diagram right here. This is just to show you an example of all of these different types of tissues. Right here you see the blood tissue. Remember, that's a connective tissue. You have loose connective tissue, elastic fibers. Obviously, the stomach needs to contract. You have skeletal muscle, which we talked about in depth and during cellular respiration. And then epithelial tissue, which remember lines the organs. And then we have right here, this would be the nervous system, and the glia cells are going to support and nourish their neurons. And we've talked about the anatomy of a neuron already, but I didn't talk about glia cells. Glia cells are going to just be cells that protect and nourish the neuron and keep them in place. I just want to show you this diagram right here, just to kind of emphasize form and function at the cellular level. And I want to, in particular, for you to pay attention to right here. I don't need you to memorize any of these words. I don't have them memorized. But I would like for you to see is the simple squamous epithelium. If you look at that, that is directly in the lungs. Those are the lungs right here. So I want you to look at the shape of these. How would you describe that shape? I would say they're like almost, they're flat compared to all these other ones. They're flat and they're almost plate-like. So how does the form fit the function? So we do know that the epithelium of the lungs are directly exposed to the outside. In that when you breathe in, they're exposed to what is brought in from the outside. So why would you want your cells of your lungs to be thin and plate-shaped like that? I just wish someone could actually answer. That would be so cool. But I can't require you to do Zoom every day because that would just be utter chaos. So I'm just going to answer it for you. I'm sure you all know the answer and that you've all said it out loud. I just can't hear you. We want these to be thin because what the job of the lungs is for air exchange or gas exchange. And so you need the cells to be thin so that gas can get across them. All right. Also, I'd like to point out the cells inside the mouth. These are called stratified squamous epithelium. They line the inside of the mouth. And I want you to notice that, it's not just one thin layer. There's multiple layers of cells that line the mouth. Why would that be? Why would you need multiple layers of cells lining the mouth? Well, I know you all have come up with the answer. It's because there's a lot of things that happen in the mouth when eating that sloughs off cells. And if you didn't have, or if this wolf, which you and the wolf are very similar in that you have these layers of cells in your mouth, when you ate and it sloughed off the cells, you would actually start bleeding every time you ate. So that is how the form fits the function on cellular level. Interesting stuff. We've gone over muscle tissue. I don't think I really need to touch on that very much. We have skeletal muscle that's responsible for movement, smooth voluntary movement. I need to say voluntary movement. I hope you recognize the sarcomere. Smooth muscle, which is responsible for involuntary movement of the intestines and the bladder and other things like that. And then cardiac muscle, which is solely responsible for the heart and heart contraction. Just remember that smooth muscle is involuntary and it's for the intestines. All right, and then we get to nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is neurons in the brain and the spinal cord. I don't need, we've already gone over the neuron and parts of the neuron and how the action potential works and how the neuron fires. I just like for you to just kind of refamiliarize yourself. This is the cell body, and remember the nucleus is inside of the cell body. Write that down. Then dendrites are on the outside. They receive incoming signals, and then the axon is going to transmit the signal, and then remember a neurotransmitter is released at the end. Sorry about that. How does form fit function for the neuron? Well, let's see. You have a cell body here with lots of dendrites. So how does that fit the function of really quick signals being sent? Well, you have a lot of incoming stimulus that plays a role. And then this axon body is actually insulated with a little fatty layer. And we know that if electricity moves through a fatty layer, it actually conducts it quicker. So that's how the form of a neuron fits its function. All right, and then we have our connective tissue. Honestly, all I really want you to be able to recognize are examples of connective tissue. Collagen, so collagen is like what's in your face that keeps it kind of elastic, and it starts to like really droop down when you start aging, and that's why people get collagen injected into their face, because they're trying to retain their youth. Bone is considered connective tissue, cartilage here, and then just remember that blood is also a connective tissue. All right, we are going to go over the endocrine system. We've already gone over the nervous system, but in this chapter we are going to talk about the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is basically slow acting, long lasting hormones travel through the blood. So you have your effector that's going to release a hormone. It's going to travel through the blood, and then the cell that's supposed to receive it will then receive it and will give a response. So I really just want you to know endocrine system for this chapter. All right, homeostasis. Homeostasis, everybody's heard. This is how your body is going to maintain a steady state or internal balance. So if I go outside, I'm going to start sweating because my body temperature goes up. I'm going to start sweating so that evaporative cooling can take place and my body temperature can go back to where it was. So any fluctuation above or below a set point, like temperature, is going to serve as a stimulus. So my temperature going up, that's a stimulus. These are going to be detected by a sensor. So the sensor for body temperature is a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is going to sense body temperature has gone up, and then it's going to trigger a response, sweat, and then you're going to cool off, and the response is going to return the variable to a set point. The effector is any organ or tissue that receives the information and then brings about the changes needed. So let's say you are cold. Your hypothalamus is going to sense that you are cold. It's going to send a signal to your thyroid. Your thyroid would then be the effector organ that it's going to increase metabolism and the increased breaking of bonds of molecules to bring up body temperature. That's one way. Another way is your hypothalamus senses that you're too cold. It's going to send a signal to your skeletal muscles so that you start shivering and so that you can warm up. All right, so you have a normal range. A stimulus is going to change an internal variable like temperature. Sensor, like your hypothalamus, is going to sense temperature change, and it's part of the control center in your brain, and then it's going to bring about a response, and that's going to return it back to a normal range. And so this brings us to positive and negative feedback. Negative feedback is, homeostasis is negative feedback, basically. More gets you less. The hotter I get, the more my body's going to work to bring my temperature down. The colder I get, the more my body's going to work to bring my temperature back up. So it's going to return the changing conditions back to a set point. So temperature, blood glucose levels, which we're going to talk about in detail tomorrow, and then blood pH. Positive feedback is actually really interesting to me. More gets you more, and there aren't very many examples of this. The response moves the variable further away from the set point, and you have an amplification of a response. I only have a couple of examples: lactation and labor. Lactation in mammals, the more the baby tries to get milk, the more milk the mom is going to produce. And then the onset of labor and childbirth. The more the uterus contracts, the more the uterus contracts. And that's why contractions get stronger and stronger as time goes on. And in plants, ripening of fruit is an example of positive feedback. All right, and this just shows you a temperature regulation. I think I've talked enough about that. When your temperature goes up, your body's going to do something to bring it down. When your temperature goes down, your body's going to do something to bring it back up. All right, and that brings us to thermoregulation, just a prime example of homeostasis in animals. The maintenance of an internal body temperature within a variable range. And so endotherms are going to generate heat by metabolism, the breaking of bonds. So birds and mammals, your warm-blooded animals, are going to generate heat by the breaking of bonds. And your ectotherms are going to gain heat from external sources. And so which is more active? So you have your endotherm that's going to generate heat by metabolism, your ectotherm that's going to generate heat from external sources. So endotherm, think of you as a human. Ectotherm, think of a lizard laying on a rock, a really warm rock. Which one is more active at greater temperature variations? Which one requires more energy? So the one that is more active at greater temperature variations would be your endotherm, because it's not relying on the environment to regulate its temperature, to help regulate its temperature. Which one requires more energy? Also the endotherm. The endotherm is going to require more energy because that is how it regulates its temperature internally. The ectotherm, when it's cold, it's going to slow down, get heat from its environment. All right, our example of an endotherm would be this walrus right here. Look how chubby that walrus is. And then your ectotherm is going to be a lizard. So just two examples of how animals can regulate temperature. All right, and this just chart right here is just going to kind of show how the endotherm is going to maintain a constant temperature, while the ectotherm, its temperature is going to vary because, due to the environment that it's in. I'm going to skip this slide because it's not super important. There are 5 other, I don't need you to know radiation, evaporation, conduction, or convection. 5 adaptations for thermoregulation: insulation, circulatory adaptations, evaporative cooling, behavior responses like shivering, and then cellular adjustments like antifreeze proteins. You'll remember that video we watched about the fish with the antifreeze proteins. All right, and then we have energy use, which is metabolic rate. We talked about ectotherms have a much lower metabolic rate, endotherms have a much higher metabolic rate, and that makes sense because the metabolic rate of the endotherm is going to keep it warm when it needs to warm up. Metabolic rate is inversely related to body size. So this can bring you back to, I said the mouse is going to have a higher metabolism than the elephant, and what that has to do is temperature regulation, like we said before. Countercurrent heat exchange is going to involve the warm blood on the inside, or the core of the animal, moving out to the outside of the animal, and when it passes by the cold blood that's moving in, it's going to warm it up. So the warm blood is moving from the inside to the outside. The cold blood is moving from the outside to the inside. That when they cross paths with each other or next to each other, the heat is actually going to move into the colder blood. All right, and this is really just repeating what I already talked about with body temperature and the hypothalamus sensing temperature changes and creating a response. I think this is one of the last things I'm going to talk about. I was really trying to keep this to under 20 minutes, but it's going to be kind of difficult to do that. I'm going to do my best to kind of wrap it up here. All right, torpor and energy conservation, other ways that energy can get conserved and how homeostasis is going to occur. Torpor, hibernation and estivation I'll let you see my face now. Hibernation and estivation are two types of torpor. Torpor is a physiologic state in which activity is low and metabolism decreases. And what this is doing is it's saving energy during a really difficult time for the animal. Hibernation is torpor during winter. Estivation is torpor during summer. And here are your examples. How cute. So if you had to guess, is this hibernation or estivation? Yes, you're right. It's hibernation. If you had to guess, this worm right here, is that hibernation or estivation? You're right, it is estivation. When the soil gets really dry during hot times, this earthworm is going to tie itself in a knot and stay there in order to conserve moisture. And then it's going to stay there until it gets wet again on the outside. Snails, what do you think? Estivation, you're right. And then the bear, we all know bears hibernate. So just a way to conserve energy and to maintain that internal balance. All right. I went a little over time and I'm sorry. I was just so excited about animal form and function. I hope that you understand what positive feedback is. More gets you more. What negative feedback is. More gets you less and less gets you more. And I hope that you can kind of just be familiar with some of those examples of how animals are achieving thermoregulation, which is a way that they achieve homeostasis or a balance. And I hope that you understand that homeostasis is negative feedback. All right, so what I want you to do is set your timer, study your Quizlet for like 15 or 20 minutes, go over those words. It's 20 vocab words, please. We're gonna, use the, I don't know, what do they call it? Like Scout's Honor or the honor method. Whoops. Nope, I don't want to update. And then take the Socrative assessment using the room number, DTKPFKMP, and then email me the word complete when it's all done. This should all take you a total of 30 more minutes to complete. And then I will study the Quizlet, take the Socrative quiz, and then I will see you tomorrow. You'll open your laptop tomorrow and we will start learning about the endocrine system and diabetes. Y'all. All right. Have a great day. I'll see y'all tomorrow.